All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks again to everyone for joining today's webinar on digitally transforming procurement at scale. We're really excited to get started with the content, but first just want to go over a few housekeeping announcements. First is always a really popular question: will the webinar be recorded? And the answer is yes. We'll be sure to share the recording with all of you as a follow-up afterwards. And the on-demand recording will also be available on the Fair Market website for those of you that want to share the recording link. Secondly, you'll notice in the go-to-market control panel, it will appear on the right-hand side of your main screen. We have a live Q&A option in the webinar. So if you hear something that prompts a question for any of our presenters and you want to engage, you can submit those questions in the questions section of the control panel, and we'll be sure to address it at the end of the presentation. So to kick things off today, my name is Katie LaFaso, and I'm the Senior Content Manager here on our marketing team at Fair Market, and we're really thrilled to introduce our speakers today. I'm joined by Erin McFarlane, who is the Head of Strategy and Execution at Fair Market, Michael Van Koolen, who is a Global Procurement Executive and Advisor, and David Gonzalez, who's the Director of Procurement Services at Denali, a WNS company. On our webinar agenda today, we are going to go through a digital transformation overview. Then we'll discuss leading a digital transformation, talk about some lessons learned, benefits of a successful transformation, and then we'll end with some key takeaways. And with that, Erin, I'm going to let you take it away and jump into today's topic around digitally transforming procurement at scale.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much, Katie. First, wanted to thank everybody on the line for taking time out of your day to listen to the three of us chat about this. My role, as stated, I'm the Head of Strategy and Execution at Fair Market. And at Fair Market, we automate the sourcing process using AI and machine learning. Specifically at the company, I work on a lot of our strategic digital transformations with our various enterprise customers. In the past, I've rolled out Ariba, Oracle, and other ERPs with several large institutions, including financial institutions and telecom. So it's a pleasure to meet all of you.
Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Van Koolen, or MVK, as some might refer to me. I've been in procurement for over 10 years, leading global transformations for procurement and utilizing the power of technology to drive additional value. I've been doing that for companies like VF Corp, the parent company for North Face, Vans, Timberland, and 25 other brands. And most recently, for 4.5 years, been doing that at Lululemon, where ultimately we implemented Coupa. And we'll be talking about some of the learnings, etc., over the next hour. I'm excited to be here. Thank you all for joining, and look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is David Gonzalez. I'm a director at Denali. I've been part of the firm for the last 10 years, based in Seattle, Washington, working with a variety of Fortune 500 clients in providing procurement services. Recently have moved into business development role, responsible for the West Coast of the U.S. and supporting our clients, and also very excited to be here and to participate in this webinar.
Great. Okay, so as we start to kick these things off, yeah, when we can all Google what digital transformation means and what the definition is of automating business processes by utilizing the power of technology. Digitally transforming, AI and RPA and all those acronyms, they've been buzzwords for the past couple of years. But if you actually look at studies, roughly 30% of all digital transformations are actually successful. That means that the other 70% are either not delivering the value that it was anticipated to create when the project started, or it just turns into a complete failure. So slide number 5, what we'll show there is, how do you really get that caterpillar into a beautiful butterfly. I mean, that's really the goal of any transformation, whether it's procurement transformation or digitally transforming procurement at scale. And what we will discuss today is, what are some of the key learnings that Aaron, David, and myself have had over the course of doing this for the latter part of let's say 10 years, and what are some of the key success factors that we've been able to identify, such as having the right leadership in place, redesigning your process, to not automate a flawed process, managing change, which is obviously always the most popular one, but also developing the right skills and having the right teams in place to really maximize any digital platform that you're implementing. So slide number 6, it really, what we're trying to do here is to bridge the digital transformation and the procurement transformation. And obviously, I recognize that we have an esteemed audience here on the WebEx of professionals in different industries, different maturities, but the procurement process itself is fairly similar. The beauty of procurement, I always say, having done this for more than 10 years, is you could theoretically do procurement at any company. The process itself is the same. And so what we're really trying to show here is the various maturity stages of procurement. And typically, if you come into an organization and you're going to lead a procurement transformation, then very likely you'll be in a very transactional, operational, tactical type of model. If I go back at 4.5 years ago at Lululemon, that's exactly where we were. Cutting purchase orders, making sure stuff ended up at the right place at the right time, potentially doing 2- or 3-way matching, but highly transactional. And as we matured from a procurement standpoint over the past 4 years, you're really starting to change and transform procurement from like I said, a highly transactional operational model to a model that's going to be highly collaborative, have that seat at the table, as we always like to refer to it in procurement. Starting to manage your spend, knowing who your suppliers are, how do you manage risk, starting to have some real competitive pressure when it comes to selecting your suppliers. And ultimately, the goal is to be that highly innovative, value-driving, top-line performing procurement organization. When we then try to tie that to technology, what slide 7 does is it really starts to bridge that, right? So level 1, highly transactional, highly operational, highly tactical in nature. When you go to the second level of maturity in procurement, you start to do lots of competitive RFPs. You start to do some fact-based decision making when it comes to selecting your suppliers. You start to look at risk and other factors before you award a contract. But at some point in the journey, you are going to need an enablement, a technology, a platform, which at Lulu's case was Coupa. There's obviously other platforms out there today. This is not a sales pitch for Coupa per se, but at least you do require technology in order to break through the barriers of having the right analytics, having the right governance, having the right buying practices in place. And so what really this slide is trying to do is to display that in a way that we can talk about it. And if I then make that bridge to where I previously worked at Lululemon, it was really part of a broader strategy to digitize the CFO office. It wasn't just about source to pay. It was a much broader conversation around how do we utilize technology and how do we maximize the benefits of what technology brings to the table. And roughly between that level 2 and level 3 is where you need to start to have that conversation. So that's kind of that bridge what I was trying to describe. If we go at slide number 8, and obviously there will be lots of Q&A at the end, so please start to think about your questions, because really a rich Q&A is why we're trying to do this. What's the right way to transform? Now it's always arbitrary to say, well, this is the way, but at least from my experience and what I've seen work really well is that you use an agile methodology. So don't do the classical big bang approach. So just again, to give you an example of how we did this at Lulu, we started with our head offices and our distribution centers, and then we stabilized the platform. There were some learnings. How did we configure the system, and how is this going to change my buying practices? And have we focused enough on the change management? But doing that in a smaller setting, in a more agile type of way, allows you to make changes fairly quickly and fairly smoothly without creating massive disruption to the operators and the operation. And so that's what we did. We then followed by a store pilot. Again, I'm sure everybody knows who Lululemon is. We did a pilot in around about 25 stores. We then rolled it out in the full fleet in North America, which is around about 400 stores. And then the next step, of course, is to be global. Again, applying your learnings as you go agile and as you go smaller in the beginning allows you to create trust, a higher level of adoption, which is the key to ultimately deliver the return on investment that we committed to when we got the funding approved to begin with. We'll talk more
Michael, I agree. I agree
come on.
completely. I think it's important. The most successful rollouts that I've ever seen are the ones that take it really small to start and learn a lot and change as they go along. It's awfully hard to change midstream if you made a bad assumption, if you're rolling out to a huge amount of users to start. So I think building that in is really, really important. David, what do you think? What have you seen?
Yeah, I would just add one more comment to this topic, right? I mean, I think one of the important pieces here is around stakeholder management, and you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think what we find is that by starting small, you can bring people along in the process, right? And you'll find that there are additional stakeholders who should really be part of this kind of organizational change that play a critical role. And if you go big bang out the gate, in many cases, you're kind of missing that audience and missing their input through the process. And so I found with our clients who are adopting technology in the procurement space, and you've got players that need to be involved, including IT, finance, controlling, legal, right? And then to what Michael was alluding to, you start getting into the operations teams out in the field. And each one of them plays a role in this, right? They need to be part of the story and they need to buy into it. And you need to allow for time to make that work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in a second, we'll touch on that as well in terms of lessons learned. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
Okay, so are we all good with the slides? It looked like we had a small pause there.
Yeah, we lost the slides for a second, but they're back now. We're good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so why is this important, this topic? And obviously there's a lot of interest in the procurement space around digitization, around technology. And so what we wanted to do is share a couple of examples of why this topic is so important. So if we go to slide 10, what we can see is the data is really clear, right? Organizations that are investing in building strong procurement practices are directly impacting the financial performance of their companies. This chart here is from our friends at McKinsey, and it highlights the bottom line impact that leading procurement teams are creating within their organizations, right? It's not just around procurement cost savings, but also how those cost savings help reduce cost of goods sold, how they impact margin, right? And what we can see is that people who are investing in procurement are reaping the benefits of it. Another reason is, if we go to slide 11, another reason that this topic is so important is, CPOs are focused on digitization. They're investing in digitization. Next week, a little shameless plug here for Denali. Next week, Denali, in partnership with CIPS, which is the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply based in the United Kingdom, we will be releasing a benchmark report focused on performance procurement. You'll be able to download that from our Denali website next week. And in that report, we asked the question to CPOs, and over 300 responses to this survey around, are they investing in digital tools? And what we found is that 83% of CPOs have implemented a digital tool. The data is really interesting, though. What we're finding is, of that 83%, about 30% are reporting great adoption. Another 30% are saying we're right in the middle of our implementation. And then the remainder is saying they're not seeing value. They're consistently not seeing value in the tools that they're investing in. So why? Why is it that they're not seeing the value? And we think it ties back into more than just the technology, and that's something that we'll further explore in this webinar today. But what we found in our reporting is that only 33% of CPOs have a clear and documented vision for their procurement organization. So they're really not outlining what are their priorities, what are their values, what is their focus. We're also seeing that only 40% of CPOs are tracking process efficiencies as their operating metrics, right? So they're only primarily focused on cost savings. They're not thinking about cycle time. They're not thinking about customer satisfaction. They're not looking at other metrics that we think are really important. Their stakeholder communication plans are an issue. About half of the CPOs have no documented process for stakeholder communication. And then the last piece is around change management. We were also surprised to learn that CPOs are saying about a third of the CPOs are claiming they don't have a change management plan. If you're going to invest in technology, right, and you're going to go on this journey to digitize your procurement processes, change management is critical. Stakeholder communication is critical. Measuring your operating metrics is critical. And I think what we're finding is that CPOs are quick to invest in these tools without having some of these building blocks in place. Let's go ahead to the next slide, and I'll hand it back to Michael.
Yeah, no, it's great, and it's a really good bridge to what we're going to talk about next. If we look at slide number 13, as David was referring to, there are some really key identifiable pieces of how to successfully transform digitally a procurement organization within any company. The biggest one, and I think David just mentioned this as well, is around governance. Let's make sure that we have a really clear, as we start, set of rules and operating principles. But maybe evenly important is, what if there is an issue? What if something comes up that requires a change? They happen. And if you have a really good cross-functional group, and that's where the key is, that allows to very quickly react to the changing environment, to a potential change in design or a change in operating model or whatever that change might be, having that very nimble cross-functional group that can make decisions very, very quickly, can communicate them to whomever is impacted in a sophisticated way. That allows you to successfully change your operating model if that's what it's required. And so I can't stress enough that change management can be fairly straightforward, just as long as you think about who are you going to impact. Nobody likes change, and so the quicker that you're able to figure out, like, how do you communicate change and who is impacted by it, and ensuring that you have that cross-functional group, the higher the likelihood is that it'll be successful. Excuse me. The collaboration in that is critical. So it's not just procurement going off in the ivory tower. Ultimately, procurement does touch the lives of pretty much everybody in the company. Everybody buys something. Everybody needs something to execute whatever their strategic vision is. And so keeping an eye out for that, and don't turn procurement into a silo is super critical. And as a finance guy at heart, I always say, stick to the facts. Fact-based decision making, using real analytics. And what I mean with that is, we all can become really judgmental and react to, anecdotes or, hearsay, or, oh, I just heard about this tool, it doesn't work, it's more clunky. Really stick to the facts and articulate what the value is that you bring to the table. To me, have always served really well. On slide 14, I think most procurement folks on the phone you know, we always have the tendency to look at savings, right? We have that natural tendency to focus on savings, and I always refer to savings as, yes, it is, part of why procurement is around, but I mean, that is not my main goal. I never focus on savings. I focus on value creation. And if you do everything we just described well, fact-based decision making, keep an eye out for risk mitigation, and those types of things, then obviously savings is an outcome. But savings should never be a goal, because if you just talk about savings, then most of your stakeholders will likely not be as collaborative as if you were to talk about value and how do I execute your strategy faster, and how do I enable you with better tools and better services or better capabilities. So the more you focus on that, at least again from my perspective and my experience, the higher the likelihood is for a transformation to be successful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
Michael,
completely agree, Michael.
Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
David.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Well, both you and I were going to jump in and say absolutely on this one, that if you're doing everything else right, savings happen. You know, if you're sourcing things appropriately, if you're using your spend analytics right, if you're reducing your overall cycles, you're increasing things like compliance and savings, those are outcomes. And the goal needs to be a little bit further back. You know, if you're talking about leading indicators and lagging indicators, savings is a lag. Savings is something that happens at the end, if you do everything else right. What do you think, David? Same thing?
Yeah, no, I think, in the title of this webinar, we talk about digitally transforming at scale, right? And I think when you add that at scale, a big piece of this, again, is around stakeholder engagement and stakeholder involvement. And I was just going to mention, I think Michael hit it on the head, right, with talking about value and business value created. And most of business partners are not going to be interested in just talking about cost savings, right? There's this idea that, procurement is just focused on cost savings. Procurement is slow. Procurement is where things take a long time, right? And I think it's really important, if you're going to do this at scale, that you're able to talk in a business language that will resonate with those stakeholders. So that was really all. I just wanted to add to Michael's point. I couldn't agree more.
Great. No, thank you guys. Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So, and then, I mean, that kind of to bring it all together, just want to talk a little bit about, some of the lessons learned. Like obviously any transformation comes with challenges and with learnings, and I continue to learn as I continue to do this more often, if you will. But yeah, on slide 16, there are just some key things that, again, that I've learned along the way. I think the first one is around that governance model, having clear roles and responsibilities, and do that at the front, do that up front. I'd always, kind of refer to that as almost like marriage. You just want to have some really clear rules, and not to belabor that, but having that clarity up front, like who is responsible for what, who is responsible for implementation, who's responsible for setting up the system, and who's ultimately going to make some key decisions, it is really, really, really crucial. We just talked about it earlier. David did a really good job teeing it up as well with some of the metrics that came out of the CPO study. But having stakeholders across multiple departments, and even within those departments at multiple levels, is really, really crucial. It's one thing I always say to have executive buy-in. I mean, obviously, without that, all else doesn't matter. But they are ultimately not the ones who are going to be impacted the most. So if I walk into a department and say, well, your leader has agreed to this, that doesn't necessarily translate into a successful conversation. So really just continuously having that almost like elevator pitch, like why is this relevant and why are we doing this again, and what's in it for me? What's in it for accounts payable, what's in it for the operators, what's in it for IT, for FP&A. I mean, that's a really important conversation to have. I would say celebrate early wins. I think procurement very often has the tendency to go like, oh yeah, it's part of my job. And no, I mean, sometimes it's okay to kind of own it a little bit and celebrate it. Define what success looks like. What is success? What are we trying to accomplish? Keep an eye out for things like risk mitigation. I mean, that is success, right? If we are able to mitigate risk, if we are able to drive innovation, if we are able to drive more value to the organization, if we are able to accelerate whatever strategic vision the organization is trying to accomplish, I mean, those are all successes, right? And so let's make sure that we capture that. You know, the obvious one is don't start with very sensitive categories, especially as you think about procurement transformation. You know, sensitive categories like, you know, HR or marketing. That's not to say that procurement cannot drive value, but as you go through a procurement transformation, I always say don't start there. Ensure spend is contractually available. Sounds very straightforward. But even I have had, or even I shouldn't say that, I have had situations where I went after a certain spend category, realizing halfway in it that the contract was still going for another 18 or 24 months. And then so you just wasted a whole bunch of time. Training and development, the skill sets that are required in a more mature, high-powered procurement organization are just fundamentally different than when you're in a more transactional, tactical, operational model. So training and development, equally crucial. These are in random order. It's not that one is more important than the other. And determine what resource requirements you need, right? As you think about your future model and you start to design that, you're going to automate a bunch of things, which is great. But with that next level of procurement, you are going to go raise the bar, and by raising the bar, you are going to need different types of resources. And so just keeping a really close eye out for that as you go through this transformation. You know, as you get out of that transformation, if you will, or if you get to the end of that, or at the benefit end, that you're not looking back and go like, oh wow, I've just transformed my organization, but I don't have the resources required to support it. You know, then people very quickly will fall back to the old way of how things were. And so keeping a close eye out for that, I know has served me well as well. So yeah, that's on that part. I'm going to turn it over to Aaron.
Yeah, so I would just echo some of the lessons learned that we've had in the past. You know, one of the biggest ones that I know I ran into was don't program in a bad business process. So if you've got a business process where there's tons of rework, tons of manual touch, and everything is an exception to the rule, the more you try and program in those exceptions, the more likely it is that something's going to be broken. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make with digital transformation is thinking that the technology can fix your broken process. The technology is a good time and a good opportunity for you to change that process and use it as a way to sort of sweep away a lot of that broken process. And if you don't take a step back and fix that at the same time as you implement the technology, all you did was make it harder to have exceptions to the rule, make it harder for people to get their jobs done through the existing process. So I think from my end, that's probably the biggest lesson that I learned out of some of these larger rollouts was that you really need to fix the process before you can fix the tech. What about you, David? What have your biggest ones been?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I'll touch on one piece which Michael highlighted regarding resource requirements and training and development. I think what we've seen with our clients who have gone on this transformation journey is they really need to look at their future operating model, right? And what they're finding is as they're adopting technology and as they're simplifying processes, that they don't have the right people in the right roles. And they have to figure out a way to either up level or transition people. And I think that's something that where, you know, Denali really can play a role in supporting them. You know, we have helped to create, you know, buy desks, sourcing desks, contract desks, whatever you want to call it in terms of that, really shifting that operating model so that our clients can be more strategic in nature. And I think that's definitely a part of this journey. You know, what you're working on today versus what you'll be working on in the future once you've gone live with a technology solution such as what we're describing here really does change the way you're going to operate.
And we still need you. I think that's part of it too. I know I've gotten a lot of resistance as we roll out digital transformations, that people are afraid their jobs are going to be automated away. And communicating, this is what your job is now, this is what your job is going to be, also reassures people and makes them into allies instead of people who are actively fighting against the digital transformation because of fear.
Yeah, I think Aaron, that's a really good point. Sorry to chime in here, but that's where you break the barriers of resistance for sure. Is if you were to have people get on that journey with you and articulate a vision of what the future would look like. Especially if you think about the workforce these days. I mean, millennials, and I'm sure everybody is struggling for talent and attracting and retaining talent. And if you can articulate that your roles are going to be more geared towards driving value rather than spending time and energy in trying to even figure out what your baseline is or what your current spend is, and very tactical in nature, I think that is a very appealing conversation to have. But keeping a close eye out for that is absolutely really important.
Yeah, I know I'd rather be doing a job where I'm adding strategic thought value rather than just, doing a repetitive process over and over again, checking a form, clicking a button. And I think most people want to add value in the jobs that they do. So if you show them that technology can be a tool to getting them there, I think you're more likely to have allies.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. So ultimately, we got to keep in mind, where did we want to go? Throughout all of the slides and every piece of this, both Michael and David talked about knowing why you're transforming before you even begin your transformation. So hopefully you've outlined all of the benefits of a successful transformation before you embarked on it. So you know what measurable KPIs you're looking to achieve, you know what success looks like, and you know what the outcome is. So on the next slide, we'll kind of go through some of the things you might want to think about. So here, in general, folks have a tendency to lead toward more visibility, faster execution, and better compliance. So more visibility means you simply know what's going on with your spend. And it can be really misleading to think that just because you have a purchase order for everything, or just because you have an invoice for everything, that you have visibility. Often when you start digging into those line items, you'll find big POs with a title, blanket PO for 2018. You've got one purchase order for a huge vendor. You have no idea what's going into it. You can't see down to the line level detail. You can't ask questions like, on average, how much do we pay for a project manager in technology? What's our average hourly rate? So real visibility means having actionable reports that you can actually get something out of, not that you simply have a purchase order for every transaction, although that's a good place to start. We talked about faster execution and how a lot of procurement executives, because they get lost in just looking at savings, don't focus on the execution. I know that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we run into here at Fair Market, is we're trying to help people achieve that Amazon dream. When I need to buy a faucet for my bathroom at home because something broke, I go on Amazon and I add it to my cart, and sometimes it shows up the same day. And people have an expectation that buying something for the office bathroom should be about the same. Maybe a little bit longer because you had to fill out a form. And it can be really jarring when it takes sometimes 3 days, 6 days, 4 weeks, 6 weeks to make a simple purchase. So many procurement organizations are really being pushed to drive that total time from when you need a thing until you get the thing a heck of a lot shorter. So you have to be measuring it and figuring out how long is your execution from when the business has a need until they have the service provided, or until they have the item in their hands. And then finally, policy compliance. How often are people actually doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing? My motto here has always been that if you make it really easy for people to do things the right way, they will. So most often, a lack of policy compliance is happening either because you've got a really complicated process and a really complex system, people can't figure out how to use it, or they didn't know about the right way to go. So either it's too hard to do it the right way, or they didn't know what the right way was. So if you're able to address those two things, you can really dig in deeper into policy compliance and stop being somebody who just comes along with a stick and yells at different departments for not being compliant. So SLA compliance and enforcement, cost savings comes out of things, that improved data quality and reporting. And I've seen all of these things come out of successful digital transformations, and I've seen unsuccessful digital transformations ultimately fail on one, two, or more of these things. So for example, if something delivers amazing cost savings, but it dramatically increases your risk, it brings in suppliers that aren't trusted, that aren't safe, well, then it wasn't a success overall. If something delivered reduced risk and cost savings, but it increased the total time to procure, double the amount of time that it takes to get something done, then it falls apart. So it's a balancing act. So a successful one pulls off a lot of things at once and helps to move an entire organization forward. What are some of the benefits that you've seen come out of things recently, Michael?
Yeah, no, I think this slide is really awesome, and it really articulates the value that we are saying, and we're talking about cost savings being absolutely one of them. What I've seen is a combination of different things. I think it's that Amazon thing, right? It's like, you know, people expect it, especially the younger people that are coming into organizations. They are raised in a mobile-friendly environment, and if you are still in an environment where you have to cut a purchase order in Oracle that goes through 5 different approval flows, and it's going to take you, 3 weeks for a purchase order to get approved. If you're still in that environment, yeah, then you really need to start to consider going through a digital transformation. It's getting spent under management. It's getting the path of least resistance that ultimately is going to drive the biggest amount of value. And so where I've seen a lot of success is articulating that properly, especially to our stores. Just think about stores, right? The churn there is high. People are used to Amazon, and so we had to really provide reasons why going through a source to pay platform such as Coupa, and again there's others, is beneficial. And what's in it for them? Not just ease of ordering, but also administrative complexity. And so we've really seen a lot of success when it comes to, like almost like referring to it as the Amazon type of experience, getting your arms around the spending, and then starting to manage the spend, because that's ultimately what procurement professionals want to do. Is we want to know where that money goes, almost like a money manager, and then driving more value, squeezing the maximum amount of benefits out of every dollar that leaves the building, is ultimately what procurement wants to do. I know, David, you had something to add to that?
Yeah, I think what I've found, obviously each of these plays a key role, but depending on what industry you are a part of, some of these are highlighted, right? So I find with our technology clients, social media type clients, that really improving those operational efficiencies is critical. It's about speed, right? And it's about making the process faster and also reducing the risk to the organization when you think about data privacy and some of those challenges. So really making sure that you can focus in those areas seems to resonate with our technology clients. And then in the retail space, right, it is a little bit different. It is more about improving the data and improving being able to influence more spend decisions, which then obviously directly relates to driving cost savings. And so each of these plays a role, but I think, and hopefully people participating in this webinar, are thinking about their industry and thinking about what are the maybe one or two that really resonate in their space. And I think that's quite common. And I find that across, the different industries that we support here at Denali. The last comment I'd say is maybe, in the banking financial services space, it really comes back to that risk piece and reducing risk, as well as driving the compliance. Those seem to be the metrics that are most important.
For sure. Coming out of financial services, I know that for us, compliance and risk was absolutely top of mind in everything that we did. And it was always a challenge to balance the two. You could have something, my dad said when I first started building our kitchen, that you could have something cheap or fast or good. And in procurement, we are relied upon to get all three all the time. Everything has to be at the right price, and it has to be well provided, and it has to be de-risked, and it has to be fast. And, finding the balance that's right for your organization can be really tricky. So I think we're on to the Q&A part of our event. So I'm going to turn it back over to Katie. I think we've had some questions coming in, and hopefully this will be a good time for us to have a little dialogue.
Yes, thank you so much, Erin. All right, everyone. Just a reminder that if you have any questions, on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see the GoToWebinar platform there, and there is an opportunity for you to drop in any questions that you have for our presenters. It looks like we have a couple already that have come through. So the first question is, could you provide some examples of non-sensitive categories? So maybe Michael or David, would one of you like to take that one?
Yeah, totally. I can take a first shot, David, if that's okay, and then you can chime in for sure with everything you've seen, and then I'm sure Erin as well. So non-sensitive categories, you very quickly go to IT. So I've had lots of success in telecommunication, in data and voice, MPLS, or whatever data network you have. Of course, AWS and et cetera, the hosting. So IT, definitely lots of success. Logistics, it's a very fact-based, very analytical-driven category. Both small parcel, for those on the phone who have a sizable small parcel spend, but also truckload, ocean, and air. Lots of success in that area. Packaging, so for those of you who've been into our store, you'll obviously know our Lululemon shopping bag. You'll be amazed, it's a separate conversation, but you'll be amazed how much risk we had 4.5 years ago, being single sourced with one factory in Cambodia. So we've done a lot of packaging that naturally feels maybe a little bit sensitive, but lots of success in packaging. And then, the other one that I always love to talk about is contingent labor, markup rates and pay rates versus bill rates. And those are probably some of the bigger spend categories. I'm trying to keep it industry agnostic. Some of the big ones that I've seen, office supplies is the obvious one, right? I mean, nobody really cares as long as it's a black pen. But those are typically the ones that I've seen the most amount of success in and are the least amount of sensitive. David?
Yeah, I think definitely IT was going to be my answer as well, being a category where our clients see a lot of success in digitizing and streamlining process and how they support it. So that one for sure I think resonates across industries. I would say another one that I think there's huge opportunity would be MRO, and I'm not saying that it's easy. But I think there's such a high volume of transactions that take place in the MRO category and touch so many parts of the business that many of our clients, really want to solve for that and figure out how to make life easier for those plant managers, and also their suppliers, right? And, to give a little shameless plug to the guys at Fair Market, right? I think they have technology that's really helping in that space. Not to say it's only an MRO tool, but it's definitely, they've seen a lot of value in the MRO category. And I think it's an area that can really benefit a lot, and not just on the cost saving side, but in what we were talking about around operational efficiencies and whatnot. It's a category that has huge opportunity.
All right, great. Thank you both so much. The next question is, how does a technology solution assist with the digital transformation process?
So I'll start off on this one since that's most of my job. I would say that a good software provider really should be a partner with you during your digital transformation. So they need to start out not with their own KPIs, but with yours. So they need to understand from your perspective, which strategic initiatives are they aligned to and what does success look like for you, not for them. So I think that's really important to set up front. Then I think a really good software provider is going to try and take the time to understand and map out your current processes and advise you on best practices. It can be really easy to not see the forest through the trees when you're on the inside, and software providers touch a lot of different companies. So they can tell you not only about your own process, but about how it compares to other companies and can help you to see what industry best practice might be. Next, I would say is really back to that Agile rollout, that a great software provider is going to support you in a phased rollout that tries small and slowly proves out its value over time. If you've got a software provider who's really pitching a big bang, oh, we'll get it all done and it'll magically work in 6 weeks, I would never buy that. I would say that a long phased out rollout where they're there to support the change management and really help you manage the change and help you to be agile is really the key. But that's what I'm trying to do here. So I don't know, either David or Michael, what have you seen a great software provider help with?
Yeah, I mean, I've picked one not so long ago, and again, it's not to say that that's the only one. But it's to your point, it's exactly that. It's like making sure that that software supplier, whomever you pick, understands what you're trying to solve for. Every industry is a little bit different, but at the end of the day, there's lots of similarities. I think that is probably the key for me in terms of having a successful software solution provider. David?
Yeah, I don't really have much more to add there. I think so. Let's just go to the next question.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, the next question is, how do you quantify the ROI for a typical supply chain digital transformation? David, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. I mean, I think with our clients, it typically, if we're talking technology and to making an investment in technology, our clients are needing to see a 10x ROI. That might sound aggressive, but what we're finding is for the investment to be prioritized and to make it into the next year's budget with the CFO, you've got to be able to demonstrate a significant ROI. And that, it goes back to stakeholder partnership, right? And working with your selected provider and really outlining the business case and making sure that you have buy-in from the various partners to sell it internally. But that's what we have seen. Is for an investment like this, it's 10x. Yeah.
Sorry, what I would add, David, to that, I agreed, is keep an eye out for all the benefits that you're driving, right? Not just better governance, better compliance, better visibility, but also think about administrative complexity, touchless invoicing, and what de-risking the supply chain really does and really means for an organization. I mean, it's always challenging to talk to a CFO about what's the value of de-risking a supply chain, but there's absolutely value in that, and there's absolutely ways to calculate it. But just make sure that you are keeping an eye out for all benefits that you're driving is what I would say.
Yeah, I agree. And I would, to back to that idea that savings isn't everything, it can be really tempting as a procurement professional to try and put all of your ROI into cost avoidance, cost reduction, P&L reductions. But some of that is in avoiding the risk. It's preventing the disaster. It's providing visibility that you didn't have in the past. It's allowing people to innovate because they can get the products and the services lined up that they need. So don't pigeonhole yourself when you're creating a business case or you're trying to justify ROI into making it purely and completely about the savings. Again, those happen, but the most successful digital transformations add more value, not just savings.
Yep.
All right, folks, there are several questions coming in specifically about fair market, so we'll be sure to follow up with you individually, and if you are interested in getting a demo about fair market, we can get that scheduled for you as well. I've seen some of those coming in. The next question is, as a not-for-profit organization, we do a lot of consulting services. You mentioned not to do blanket order with the over amount. Could you give an example of how to transform users to provide that hourly rate?
Yeah, it's really a challenge. So first off, people have to understand why it's important. When people are trying to get something done, they know they're going to do business with a vendor over the course of a given year. The easiest way to do it is just to create one big old PO. And when the invoices come in, you just log against that invoice. But the downside is that you don't have any visibility, or you have limited visibility into what happens. So I encourage clients to, if they're using a contract, to use a digital transformation tool to capture the pricing schedule inside the contract and then buy down off of that contract. But more than anything, it's about communicating with the requisitioners. Yes, we're asking you to do a little bit more work. We're asking you to create more detailed requisitions and more detailed purchase orders. But what we're going to get out of that at the end of the day is much more visibility into the hourly rates that we pay, how often those hourly rates are in compliance with the contracted price, and how they compare to other suppliers. So that would be my recommendation, is that you have to talk it through with the requisitioners who are actually creating these things up front.
Yeah, and I would add is it's all about visibility, right? It's like transparency. So do you know, I mean, we all know what the bill rate is, but do you know what the pay rate is? And do you know what the markup is? And do you understand why that markup is the way it is? And, the more transparency you force upon your suppliers, the better everybody gets. And so I would just add to that is it's going to give you better visibility, and it's splitting out the pay rate over the bill rate, and so that you know what the markup is the way to go.
Definitely not an easy sell to get people away from blanket purchase orders. I will say, in terms of, we were talking about like easy change versus hard change, those might be on the harder change scale, but they're definitely worth it, and they will pay off.
Totally.
All right, folks, I think I'm going to give everyone 5 minutes back in their day. Thank you so much for all the questions that came in, and thank you to all of you that joined us live today. Again, just as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, so we'll be sure to share it with all of you as a follow-up. And Erin, David, and Michael, thank you all so much for joining us today on today's webinar.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Yes.
Cheers.